Well, I promised this summer that from time to time we'd go back and revisit some of those great Bible stories that we learned as children. Vacation Bible School happened this week and it reminds us of those great stories. Stories like the Good Samaritan that we shared a couple of weeks back, and stories like well, David and Goliath. David and Goliath, it's a staple of children's Sunday school and vacation Bible school. How many of you were children when you first heard the story of little David and Goliath? Right? Take a look at that. Sure. It's found in the book of 1 Samuel. The king of Israel has a problem on his hands, and that problem is the Philistines. The Philistines had been the brash enemies, the uncouth, brash enemies of Israel for generations, all the way back to the days of the occupation of the promised land by Joshua. And their superior bronze weaponry and bronze armor made them impossible to battle. And of course, they also had this big fella named Goliath, who would come out and taunt the poor Israelite army every day. He was enormous, and no one had the courage to face him. Until, of course, you know the story, this young shepherd boy, the youngest of one of the most unimportant families among the most unimportant tribes, decided that, well, this giant surely couldn't be any more ferocious than the lions that he had fought off to protect his sheep. So little David offers himself up to fight the giant. You know so much of the story. Saul, remember Saul, the king? He offers David the king's own armor to protect him, but it weighs him down. So David says thanks, but no thanks, and he heads out into battle to meet up with the big man with the big mouth. And along the way, well, let's read the rest of the story from the book itself. We're going to pick up at verse 40 in the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, striking down the Philistine and killing him. There was no sword in David's hand. little song that went with this story? Do any of you remember? Only a boy named David, only a little sling. If you know it, sing it with me. Only a boy named David, but he could pray and sing. Only a boy named David, only a rippling brook. Only a boy named David, but 5 little stones he took, right? And 1 little stone went in the sling, and the sling went round and round. And 1 little stone went in the sling, and the sling went round and round. And round and round and round and round and round and round and round. And 1 little stone went up in the air, and the giant came tumbling down. Right? Remember this? That's it. That's all it was. That's the whole story. The story of David and Goliath. Big versus little. Brute versus faith. Strength versus intelligence. We know who wins. Little wins. Faith wins. Intelligence wins. Arrogance versus belief. We know that belief wins. Am I right? In this ultimate mismatch, we have been trained to root for the underdog, little David. But I wonder if we had been there. Well, think about it. Goliath of Gath stood almost 10 feet tall. Battle ready, battle tested, been fighting since he was a mere boy of 7 or 8 feet tall. The Philistine equivalent of shock and awe. The Israelites simply turned and ran whenever they saw him. Every day, Goliath stands on the battle line and he hollers, "Have you no one to fight me?" 40 mornings and 40 evenings he comes out to taunt them. "Surely there's one man in Israel who will fight and kill me, and then the Philistines will be your servants." Seized with fear, no one would come forward. King Saul and all of his army held their positions. Goliath, certainly an undefeatable enemy. His size, his strength, his might, his power, his arrogance. How could he ever lose? Everyone bets on the giant. Even Israel's king, Saul, sitting there under a pomegranate tree protected by 300 guards. He's betting that Goliath cannot be defeated. Of course, we know the story. David shows up, armed only with what must have seemed like heaps of audacity, and then some heaps of naive foolishness, and then some. David shows up and volunteers. And 1 swing, 1 thud, 1 mighty 10-foot fall, and it's over. And a mere boy defeats a belligerent giant. David's our hero. But I wonder if we had been there in that Galilean countryside so long ago, if we would have been there then, if we would have been so sure that David was our guy. He must have looked like such a, well, I don't want to say loser, but should we say that he looked like such an unlikely, such an unfortunate soldier? I am convinced that if we had been there on the scene, we would have all thought pretty much the same thing, that when this fight is over, there's not going to be much left of little David. See, I really do. I think we would have bet on Goliath as well. General George Patton once said famously, "Americans love a winner, and Americans will not tolerate a loser." That's why I think we would bet on the giant. See, it's a part of the fabric of our nation. Vince Lombardi, the great football coach, Vince Lombardi once said, "Show me a good loser, and I will show you a loser." See, we all want to be winners. We all want to be on the winning side. We want to be on the winning team. Isn't that right? Isn't that why we're so sports obsessed? Isn't that why we're driven by competition? Isn't that why millions of people fill out brackets during March Madness? Isn't that why people are getting up in the middle of the night to watch the World Cup? Isn't it that we're like that? We love competition and we like the winning side. Interesting this morning, all the K-State, KU rivalry talk, right? But it's not winning that builds character. Jim Tressel was a former coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes. He won 5 national championships. And he wrote a book called The Winner's Manual. And Tressel includes a provocative quote in that book by the founder of Microsoft, Bill Gates. This is the quote: "Success is a lousy teacher. It makes people think that they can't lose." And then Tressel goes on with this commentary. Tressel says, I love that quote because it puts so many things in perspective. When winners think that they can't lose, there is an upset brewing. That's when David beats Goliath. That's when the underdog triumphs. You see, Tressel says, once you think you can't lose, you begin to feel invincible. And that's the moment, that's the very moment that you're most at risk of being taken down. Americans may not think much of losing, but for all the pain that losing brings, it is the principal cure for the illusion of invincibility. Yeah? Losing is the principal cure for the illusion of invincibility. Have you ever wondered why so many heroes of the Bible were persons with such serious flaws? I mean, really. But it's all God has to work with, if you think about it. Mere mortals, folks with flaws and weaknesses. The talent pool has always been pretty thin when it comes to moral perfection, so God works with sinners because, well, that's all there really is. If you consider the roll call of God's imperfect heroes, there's Noah, he was a drunk. Abraham, who lied about his wife. Jacob, who was a liar and a deceiver. Moses, who was a murderer. Rahab, well, we know what she was. Gideon, the mighty warrior, was a spineless coward. Samson had a serious problem with lust and anger. David, even our own little David, he grows up to be an adulterer and a murderer. Solomon practices idolatry. Jonah runs away from God. Peter denied Christ, not once, but 3 times. Paul, oh, the great apostle Paul, colluded with those who stoned early Christians to death. James and John, they wanted the special seats in the kingdom of God. All of the apostles argued about which one of them would be the greatest. It's argued that God chooses folks with a shaky past and an uncertain future, so that God is the one who gets all the glory for the amazing things that is accomplished. Well, there is that. But maybe there's something more. Possibly. Could it be that God purposefully chooses the weak and the powerless and the ill-equipped for another reason? Could it be that it is persons like these who best demonstrate a kind of humility before God? An understanding that we ultimately cannot put our faith and our trust in our own strength, our own might, our own power. Could it be that these are the ones that demonstrate a humility that understands that mere humans are not invincible? or undefeatable. See, once we think that way, once we think that we are invincible or undefeatable, we run the risk of making our power and our might and our strength our idols. That's when we begin to worship our own power and our might and our strength as though this is what saves us. David shows us that to avoid temptation, we must be persons of faith. Remember, I said everyone bets on the giant. Everyone bets on the giant but one little shepherd boy with no armor, no weapon, no pedigree. But instead, David places his bet on the God of his ancestors, the God of Israel. The only one that David believes might be bigger, might be more powerful, might be mightier than even a giant Philistine. Don't make the mistake of thinking that David went out in battle armed only with a sling and 5 smooth stones. David doesn't think that. David is explicit. David says, it is the God of Israel who will defeat the giant. David places his entire faith and trust in the God of Israel and in God alone. It is the only power. It is the only power that is greater than the greatest power on earth. The power of God alone. We're going to close today with another one of those great patriotic hymns, but this one is such a great hymn because while it fittingly describes the great love of this country, our country, it reserves its praise for God and God alone. The God who has created the natural world around us, whose divine love has led us and provided for us. The God who has defended us. And this great hymn ends in a prayer. And these are the words. We'll sing them here in a moment. Refresh thy people on their toilsome way. Lead us from night to never-ending day. Fill all our lives with love and grace divine, and glory, laud, and praise be ever thine. All the glory, all the laud, all the praise be to God. Let's sing, shall we?